I believe we are. We are live.
Perfect. Thank you, Maisha.
No problem.
Hi, everyone. Thank you to all of you who's joining us on our different platforms. Maybe we'll give 10 seconds for people to start joining our live sessions. This is a part of the mini series that we do called Preparing for the New Normal. But today is actually a special session because we're kind of digressing a little bit from the new normal sessions, but talking a little bit specifically on childcare. As you will recall, we've had a session on childcare, but this one will be focusing on something that I've been talking to many of you across Scarborough Southwest, but across the province as well, when it comes to the regulatory changes that's been proposed by the Government of Ontario, regulatory changes in childcare. So, as thank you to those of you who are joining us, feel free to send your questions as we continue this live session. And we will, at the end of the session, we will try our best to answer all of these questions. Get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Doly Begum. I'm the MPP for Scarborough Southwest, also the critic for early learning and childcare. I have with me a wonderful group of individuals, experts from the childcare sector that I think I'm so privileged and honored to have here with me to talk about some of the very important regulatory changes that's been proposed by the Government of Ontario. So without further ado, let's get started. First, I will introduce Carolyn Ferns. Carolyn, wave your hand. Get to know you. Carolyn's not a stranger to our sessions. She's joined us in the past. She's the public policy and government relations coordinator. Carolyn worked for over 10 years at the Childcare Resources and Research Unit, where she co-authored the Early Childhood Education and Care in Canada series. Carolyn has a bachelor's degree in early childhood education and a master's degree in early childhood studies. She is a member of the board of directors to both Childcare Now and the Childcare Resource and Research Unit. Carolyn, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, Doly.
Next, I have Charles Pascal. Charles is an internationally respected Canadian educator with expertise in early and higher education, public policy, and leadership development. With a well-noted track record as a former college president and the deputy minister in Ontario, Charles has also demonstrated highly recorded expertise in strategic philanthropy. He has published extensively in the fields of psychology and education and has received extensive and diverse awards and recognition. In late 2007, then Premier Delton McGuinty appointed Charles as his special advisor on early learning. In June 2009, Charles released his seminar report with Our Best Future in Mind, Implementing Early Learning in Ontario, that is informing policy and practice across and outside of Canada. Welcome, Charles. And I noticed that you recently started a blog as well, so folks can check out Charles' blog on the many different policy thoughts. Next, I have Alanna Powell. Alanna is the interim coordinator at the Association of Early Childhood Educators, Ontario, the AECEO, and a passionate early childhood educator. After working at a non-for-profit childcare center, she recently completed her Master's of Arts in Early Childhood Studies at Ryerson University, where her research focused on ethical care as political responsibility. Alanna has been engaged in the childcare and advocacy movement in Ontario since 2013, advocating for a publicly funded childcare system and decent work for ECEs. She has been an active board member of the AECEO since 2017 and has worked closely with ECEs across the province on professional pay and decent work campaign. Alanna believes in the power of ECEs as advocates and change leaders. Building the collective voices of ECEs who are experts in their work and working conditions can help us achieve the change we need in the early childhood educators. Absolutely. Welcome, Alanna. Next, I have Martha Friendly. Martha Friendly is the Executive Director of the Childcare Resource and Research Unit and founder of CRRU in 1982 at the University of Toronto. As the policy researcher, Martha is an active participant in the cross-Canada childcare movement that has been advocating for a universal public system of high-quality childcare since 1970s. Welcome, Martha.
Thank you.
Finally, we also have Morna Ballantyne, who is the Executive Director of Childcare Advocacy Association of Canada. Morna has many years of experience as a childcare advocate and a 30-year legacy in public policy, advocacy, and government relations. She has led and managed several national organizations in Canada and is a skilled political and organizational strategist. Welcome, Morna. I am so impressed, so amazed, and so honored to have all of you. We have decades of experience on this panel, so thank you so much for joining me. It is an absolute honor to have you all join me today. Thank you so much. I will pass it off to Carolyn to tell us a little bit about what's happening to childcare, the government's response during COVID-19. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Doly. Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. Never sure if my toddler has done things to my headphones, so I always have to check. So thanks so much for having me. And yes, it's great to have such a wonderful panel together to discuss what really is an urgent crisis facing childcare in Ontario. The pandemic has had really a very negative impact on childcare in Ontario, and we are in a very hard position since childcare was closed temporarily at the beginning of the pandemic and has now reopened in June. Childcare centers financially are very hard hit. And we know that enrollment is very low, which is a change from what we usually talk about as the challenge in childcare, right? Which we talk about there being wait lists and not enough childcare spaces. Right now, temporarily during the pandemic, we have the opposite problem. We have childcare centers with vacancies and low enrollment. We know that childcare centers are operating, their costs are the same or more than they ever were because of the need for increased health and safety and increased staffing. So centers costs are greater, but enrollment is down, which means they're in a very precarious financial position. The Ford government hasn't put an additional penny into childcare, and we saw in the budget last week nothing but re-announcements from past years of what they're planning to do on childcare. So absolutely nothing new in terms of funding. If it wasn't for the federal government and the efforts by Martha and Morna and others across the country to push the federal government to include childcare in the Safe Restart funding, there would be no additional money for childcare right now. We know that 132 childcare centers have closed since March. And so childcare is in a really hard position. Now, what has the Ford government done? They haven't provided any additional funding. They haven't provided additional support. What they have announced are a series of really dangerous regulation changes that would place younger children into larger groups with fewer qualified staff. So they have a number of regulatory proposals as part of a 5-year review of the Childcare and Early Years Act. And submissions and comment on these proposals ends on November 20th. And after that, the government could just push through these changes, which we know early childhood educators and parents do not want. And we know that because these things have been proposed in the past, have been refuted in the past, and large numbers of parents and educators have opposed them. Research shows that they're not a good idea. But while everybody is distracted by this pandemic, while parents are just trying to make sure their children don't have the sniffles, trying to do their jobs, early childhood educators are just trying to keep the doors open of their childcare centers. The Ford government is trying to push through these changes that nobody wants. And it's a really dangerous thing to do. And I'm really glad that we have the opportunity here tonight to really dig into what they're doing and why we really all should speak up about it as soon as possible. So thank you so much. And I can't wait to hear what other panel members have to say.
Thank you so much. That really lays out the groundwork. I want to go to Charles to give us your thoughts.
Well, let's go back to the early 70s when Martha was becoming at that point, the global expert on everything. I was a co-founder of what I claim to be the first childcare center in a Canadian university. Martha has disabused me of that several times. But
Yes.
uh,
Charles, I think
He's a bit frozen.
did it freeze for me or?
Never. Is there a problem with my sound?
Now it's good. You're back now.
I'm hearing a little bit of an echo. Okay. If we go back to the Martin Ken Dryden government, which a lot of people have forgotten, Mr. Martin, through his minister Ken Dryden, had a signed off deal with all 13 Canadian sub-jurisdictions, 10 provinces, 3 territories, on a national childcare program with some very good money attached to it. It was called QUAD, quality, and you all know what quality is regarding things like ratios, the training, the provision of very well trained and well paid early childhood educators, universality, and that has to do with accessibility regarding not only geography, but the cost of it. A, accessibility, and D, developmentally enriched support for the development, the cognitive, emotional, and social development of the youngest of our young. And it seems to, just imagine if that hadn't been scrapped by Mr. Martin's successor, Mr. Harper, who scrapped Kyoto, Kelowna, and what we called KIDS through the QUAD program. So here we are today, where this particular government is doing things on the cheap, and nothing has to do whatever with what is important for kids and families. We have a huge shortage of high quality, well-trained childcare, early childhood educators. We have far too much investment in profit-driven childcare. And what we need going forward is a 10-year plan to ensure that there's high quality, accessible, developmentally enriched childcare that's universal, where a lot of it is located in elementary schools, in and around those schools to assist with transition, and to ensure that in 10 years, there's not a single public dollar that's spent on a for-profit childcare. I'm talking about a walking on the moon thing. We don't want to put lots of people out of business, and we want to have supports for those who are running mom and pop childcare centers. But it's time to be big and bold. Nothing should be the same after the pandemic, and childcare, without question, is the very best investment any government can make in the future of its society. If we want a future to be healthier, safer, more just and comfortable for the many rather than the few, the best bet is high quality childcare.
I think, thank you so much. I think one of the biggest thing we're noticing with this government is they're trying to do a lot of things on the cheap right now. And it's really impacting the lives of children, seniors, families, vulnerables across the province. And that's not how we're going to get to recovery. That's not how we're going to.
What they are doing with the education system generally is absolutely shameful. It is shameful, it's dangerous, and it's just remarkable regarding the lack of paying attention to the evidence. We also have a medical officer of health and some kind of shadow table, and we have no idea who's around that shadow table. They're listening to themselves, and it's shameful that in this province, this government continues to put people at risk.
Absolutely, it is absolutely shameful. Alanna, I want to go to you next. Your thoughts?
Thanks, Doly. And I think I'm going to pick up from something Charles was saying that's really important and has been important before the COVID pandemic, during the pandemic and will be as we continue to recover from it is the workforce, right? Early childhood educators who continue to try to assert themselves in policy conversations, in decisions, and continue to be ignored by our current government. We saw, for example, after the closure of licensed childcare centers, early childhood educators standing up and talking about what they really needed to go back to work in a safe way, in a way that ensured quality for young children in their programs, that ensured they had the working conditions and structural supports they need to do the really important pedagogical work that they do. And all of that advice was ignored in terms of reopening. And here we are now looking at the regulatory changes, which threaten, again, the quality of our early learning programs in two ways. One, in how they are putting younger children in larger group sizes, and as well, some of the proposed changes to qualified staff, which remove requirements for early childhood educators in kindergarten and school age groups, allow for short-term supply staff to be unqualified, and remove the requirement for supervisors to have experience working in licensed childcare settings. And these proposals are not what early childhood educators are asking for. They're not what our workforce needs. The recruitment and retention issues are long-standing, but we've seen ways to address them, including introducing a wage grid, supports for ongoing professional learning, access to benefits, unionization, all of these structural supports which would address recruitment and retention issues. Instead, we see the government trying to address those issues by reducing qualifications, by really jeopardizing young children's experiences, by removing early childhood educators from their positions in licensed childcare programs. And it's something we're really concerned about, and early childhood educators and families are really concerned about. So we're really grateful for this opportunity to raise their voices in this discussion as well. So thank you for having us.
Thank you so much, Alanna. I think that whole sector of the educators and what they bring to the development of our children is so important. And this government continues to forget that. For them, it's child-minding of just watching children in a space rather than the actual growth and development of children. I have Martha next. Martha, let's hear from you.
Well, I mean, there are so many things that I'd like to say in my 3 minutes, but I just want to pick out two main things that are actually separate but connected. In looking at these changes, like the fourth time around for some of the changes, having to oppose them the fourth time around, I don't think I've ever seen as bankrupt of rationales and kind of the reasons that these things are being done as this bunch of regulatory changes. And, just starting with the most popular one, which is the changes to age groups, which changes the ratios in group sizes de facto. When they brought that out the first time, and the second time, I think it was, maybe the third time too, it was because they said there had been changes to parental leave and there were no infants in childcare and we needed to change the age groups. Well, that didn't pan out because there were infants still in childcare, but I noticed that rationale has disappeared and there isn't another one to replace it. And that's kind of true, like right throughout the whole thing. I guess the one that I'm really intrigued by is the registry of the unlicensed childcare providers, which is being recycled from 1981, actually, when it was panned then. And, given everything that we've learned about why regulation is needed, not the be all and end all, but it's needed in childcare, and to sort of try to move out of that in 2020 is dumbfounding, but there's no rationale presented for it. And I guess the last thing I just want to say on this thing about, how does a government make changes? I was really interested to see that the report on the consultation on the regulation changes. There's a section in there called public and sector feedback, it's called. But when you read it, it's a little paragraph and there's nothing at all on who said what, who responded. It's what you would call a content analysis if you're doing research. Like, it seems obligatory to do that kind of thing. If you make people come out to say something, that you at least count them up and, say who said what, if you look in the back of any report like that. Okay, that's one thing I wanted to say. The second thing I want to say is completely different. I want to put this review in the context of the pandemic. I can't tell you how terrible I think it is that the government is bringing this forward at a time that the childcare community is, basically everybody's head is about to blow off. Everybody is struggling so hard to keep services going. So many staff have lost their jobs. Centers have closed and been downside, and everybody is trying to make ends meet and just try to, keep an even strain. I regard it as bullying behavior on the part of the government. There's no reason to do this at this time, especially since it's so unsubstantiated. Like there's no necessity to do this now. It could have been put off. There's no reason for it. And to insist on making the beleaguered childcare community oppose these changes in the middle of a pandemic is actually really reprehensible. And why are they doing it? This is the time that the government should be recognizing the central role that childcare, quality childcare, would play in a real she-covery. They should be supportive. They should be consulting with the sector and with the operators of childcare programs who are trying to keep their doors open, not making them come out and run around again and write briefs and write open, what have we done, open letters and all this kind of thing, and have events like this. So I mean, from my point of view, I think they should withdraw this. I said a long time ago, we should have just asked them to withdraw it. There is no good reason that's been presented that they need to do this now when everybody is already undergoing so many changes. So there are a trillion things one can say, but those are my two little things for now.
Thank you so much. And we'll come back to all of you as well on the thoughts that you have started. I want to go to Morna now. Give us a national view. What's happening?
Yeah, thanks, Doly. Well, I was going to give the national view, I guess more a view of somebody who's works nationally and has been doing a lot of work on the issue of early learning and childcare and spending many, many hours talking to the federal government. And also watching what's happening in the different provinces. And I have to say, I look at Ontario and I really can't actually believe this is happening right now. It makes absolutely no sense. Where you have a federal government, and not just a federal government, but you have such broad consensus across so many economic sectors, so many stakeholders across the country that are saying, this is the moment where we need a massive, massive investment, massive spending on early learning and childcare. We have an Ontario government that is retracting and going backwards. Now, it's not the only provincial government doing that, but it's really an important and big government that is doing that. And it's going to really set back not just children, parents, families, communities in Ontario, but I think it's going to set back economic recovery across the country. So it's not just that the Ontario government is, doing the wrong thing. I think it's being reckless and irresponsible. It's also, as Martha's just pointed out and others, it's incredibly undemocratic. The government is not responding through these regulatory changes or through its last budget to the priorities of the people, and it's not being responsive to the economic needs of the province that go, of course, far beyond parents, working parents, and working mothers. So, and the timing of it, of course, is you do have this great consensus. I mean, you have the governor of the Bank of Canada, you have all the major banks, you have the Chamber of Commerce, you have the Business Council, you have labor unions, you have all kinds of organizations, anti-poverty organizations, organizations concerned about human rights. Everybody is saying what we need first and foremost right now to get through the pandemic, which is still raging, and to recover in a post-pandemic, we need early learning and childcare. That's what we need. And the federal government, in the speech from the throne, said, we've heard you and we're ready to act. We're ready to make a sustained, substantive, long-term investment in early learning and childcare. We're willing to work with the provinces, and you have the Ontario government retrenching and going back. It makes no sense.
Thank you so much. I see Charles wants to go ahead, Charles.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Morna. Look, let me preface what I'm about to say with something that will allow people watching and listening to get to know me a little bit better. I am a total nonpartisan. I'm a recovering bureaucrat. I do not hold a card with any political party, and I never have. I vote my values, which are really clear, depending on what's at play. So it's nice to see. The best part about the pandemic is that the federal government finally, let's be real clear here. The federal government has been promising. It goes back to, post Martin Dryden. The federal government hasn't done much ever since. The best part about the pandemic is what Morna said at the end, which is the number of people who now are in positions of social and economic power, who now understand that this is really the best investment going forward. And that's a good thing. Now, back to the Ontario government. Again, I say this as a nonpartisan. I've been looking at educational issues and social policy since the mid-'60s in Ontario. So there's one of two things that have to be put on the table. Either the Ontario government is totally incompetent, or this is all a Trojan horse across all files to privatize everything. It can't be anything in between. So regarding democracy, proper consultation, doing the right thing in long-term care, doing the right thing in healthcare, doing the right thing with childcare and education and just about everything. Either this is a government that is decided to be destructive for its own sake because they're incompetent, or they have an end game to increase the possibility that they can privatize this, that, and everything going forward. It can't be anything in between. Take your choice.
Well, thank you for that. I think first I want to take a moment to recognize some of the folks who have joined us and have been commenting, and they're really, bringing some of these thoughts home. Monica joined us. She said Mr. Doug Ford announced last week his long-term care announcement that he's an advocate for vulnerable citizens. The proposed changes do not reflect this. Am I missing something? Monica, I think all of us here will agree that no, we're all in the same boat with that question, because his budget does not reflect any of that. You can come in front of a camera and say things, but when you have real commitment, the numbers will show. And right now, the numbers don't show. When we look at the childcare budget, for example, if you compare it to the estimates for this year, it's actually less than what the actuals were last year. And we're in the midst of a pandemic. Carolyn, I know, did you want to say something on this thought?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just to echo what you were saying, Dolly, I mean, it followed the money. The Ontario budget was last week, and Minister Phillips got up there and said something like, when I hear that a third of Canadian women are leaving the workforce, that's an alarm bell. And then the next three sentences were just to re-announce things that they had said it could have been written 2 years ago. So doing absolutely nothing different, not putting one new penny into childcare, and claiming that they care about vulnerable citizens, or claiming that they care about women's labor force participation. Well, the proof is in the pudding, or the proof of the pudding is in the eating. And the truth of what a government wants to do is in their budget, and the budget does not bear out those words, and neither do these regulation changes, because what you see there is that they're just trying to put more young kids into larger groups, which is exactly the last thing we should be doing in the middle of a pandemic.
And I want to pick up on one thing actually Charles was just talking about, which is governments have dangled this childcare piece. And I know I want to be optimistic, and putting on my MPP hat, we want to make sure that we work together. So I don't know how optimistic I am with the federal government. Definitely not very optimistic with the provincial government. But I have heard this announcement many, many times. Do you think this is, are we actually expecting funding from the federal government? And with these kind of regulatory changes that's been proposed, does it mean that Ontario might actually miss out on these fundings? should they go ahead with some of these changes?
That's the point I actually wanted to bring up, because don't forget, the federal government has been transferring money to all of the provinces, including Ontario, for 3 years. Under they have this multilateral framework agreement, and what they have been transferring isn't enough money, but it is money, and the province is spending it because I've just been, they actually are spending it, and they just made an agreement for an additional year. Now, all the provinces have agreed to a set of principles which start with, have quality in them: accessibility, affordability, quality, inclusivity, and flexibility. We're not really sure what that means, but nevertheless, there's 5 principles. They're not really operationalized yet. Now, the federal government presumably would have to spend more money. We would assume that we who work with the federal government a lot, we are assuming that they will have to spend more money if they're going to fulfill what they have said they're going to do, which is actually to put money into a system working with the provinces. The nub of it is, what is it, if you look at how social programs work in Canada within provincial jurisdiction, it is true that the federal government has levers, used to be called the federal spending power. They spend money and they say to the provinces, if they want to, how far can they go in saying this is what you need to do? But it's pretty clear that if a province agrees to quality and they start cutting the number of staff and shoving more children into larger groups against all the research, it's very hard to argue that that is improving quality, or that it's not, or it's even not even the status quo. So I think the nub of this, things going forward, if we are all successful, I'm saying all of us, in encouraging the Trudeau government to keep going with what they've said they're going to do, the provinces have to be engaged in it. And that means the provinces have to do the right thing. If they don't do the right thing, can or will the federal government continue to give them money? It's a really interesting question that I think we all really need to have a point of view on. And my point of view is the federal government really needs to be making as many demands on the provinces as they can, within the Canadian constitutional arrangements, which are, they're not set in stone. They're open to interpretation. So I think that's a thing really keep your eye on.
So, but you also want a situation where, of course, there's no guarantee that the federal government is going to make good on its promise, although we're going to do our best to make sure it does. Right. But one of the ways to make the federal government make it come through on its commitment is for provinces to put pressure on the federal government. Ontario has a huge amount to gain if federal money was invested wisely, and in an evidence-based way on early learning and childcare. The Ontario economy stands more to gain than a lot of economies, for example, the Quebec economy, because female participation rates in the paid labor force are lower in Ontario than in Quebec. So there is more ground to make up. And it's also suffered as a province tremendously from job loss, because it's historically and traditionally, based on industries that have really been decimated. So what Ontario needs to be looking at is, how do we shift the economy? How do we green the economy? Well, what better way to do it than a massive investment in a system of early learning and childcare? We're starting to calculate the numbers of jobs, good jobs, that could be created with proper levels of public funding in early learning and childcare. And Ontario will come out a major winner if it steps up. So it's, there's going to have to be cooperation. The Ontario government, as I say, is being reckless from actually going in the reverse, going backwards instead of forwards, and at this critical time.
Yep.
Just a comment about what Morna said about holding this federal government's feet to the fire regarding their promise. Do you think a year from now this federal government will be in power? So when it comes to evidence-based lobbying, evidence-based conversations, I hope that people like Martha and others are having conversations with Mr. O'Toole, who over the last couple of weeks has been sounding like a social democrat regarding some of the things he's promised. So regarding what the federal government has promised, there's a whole bunch of reasons why I worry about whether that's going to hold. That's why what Morna said earlier about bank economists, about people in power, about economists across the country, about labor leaders, large and small, the power they have, especially from the business community, they need to be kept in check, informed by people like my colleagues on the panel about the social economic investment payoff of early learning and childcare. Because the notion that Mr. Trudeau's government is going to be in power in a year, if people want to take that for granted and let these other forces of pressure go to the side, big mistake.
Go ahead, Alanna.
I just want to take up this idea of power, because I think we still got to November 20th to sort of push back against these regulatory changes, and something we've really experienced over the last 7 months with the pandemic is the power of educators and the power of parents to really make clear and visible their needs. And I think that's what we really need in the next 10 days if we're going to show the Ford government that we don't want these regulatory changes. We've seen the consultations that went in. There were consultations from Indigenous organizations that were ignored. There were consultations from Black organizations that were ignored. There were consultations from early childhood educators that were ignored. As a mother, my daughter's almost 2 years old. The thought of her going into a preschool room with 24 children and with children as old as 7 years old terrifies me. I'm not okay with this. And we know that people aren't. But what we need people to do here is take this moment and this opportunity to communicate that, because there is power in the collective, right? And if we're all saying to the ministry, this isn't okay, and if we're saying it publicly, we can hold them accountable for what they're trying to do. And I really encourage people to do it, because what's at risk here is, it's the value of these programs. It's the experiences that children have every day that are going to be compromised. And I think we need to make sure people understand that.
Yeah, that was beautifully put. I want to, for folks who are watching and commenting, thank you. You can also, we'll have a petition up that I will be presenting in the legislature. Feel free to, please sign the petition, and we'll also make sure that we give you contact information for the ministry as well as the premier, so that you can call them up, send them an email, and ask them to stop doing what they're doing, because these regulatory changes are very problematic. They're dangerous. I also have, I think Monica wrote another comment that actually Charles touched on earlier, which was to do with right here, Quad. The Quad gave us hope that government really had to value the importance of early learning. And Charles, you talked a little bit about that. Did you want to comment on Monica's comment?
No, she's right. Martha played a big role during those times. Lots of conversations with Ken Dryden, the minister, right across the country, 13 jurisdictions. It felt real. And there was Martha, I think there was about $5 billion that was going to kickstart it. There was going to be a tracking system, because one of the problems with fiscal federalism, as people have pointed out, is the transfer of money doesn't necessarily the money goes where it's supposed to go. It can go into consolidated revenue for whatever. That's a problem with fiscal federalism.
Yeah.
It's one of the points that we've been trying to make.
Yeah.
It's one of the points that's really important to make, because actually a lot of the money has been, that has been spent so far by the federal government is untrackable. It's not really, with some provinces, it's pretty obvious where it's gone, but it's really kind of, it's very mushy. And I really agree that if this is public money that's being spent. We're not so cavalier about money in the childcare world that we sort of think, oh, whatever, it can sort of, go, whatever, get put back into general revenues or whatever. So what's missing really is, we're quite aware of this and keep promoting this idea that there needs to be some apparatus around this. There needs to be, it's not just, like a matter of, us in the community. There are a lot of layers of it, but if we're going to really have a childcare system, there needs to be a lot more meat in actually how we have a childcare system. Who actually looks at it? What it means to deliver it. We want to build it up, not tear it down like it's happening in Ontario. So this is really the problem, is that it's not like we're at a high level where everything is working well and it's being undermined. It's actually pretty, it's a market. It's pretty, underfunded. The people working in it are already underpaid. Maybe, there's a lot of people who don't have enough education, so forth and so on. So the thing is, we really have to build it up from where we are, not tear it down. And that's why we need to use all the levers that we have. And if the federal government is possibly a lever, sometimes it is and it isn't, but there are possible levers. We'd like to see those. But there's also levers from advocacy at the grassroots. So it's a multi-pronged kind of thing that we're working in, all of which, like some of us keep putting the hats on and off all the time, but that's what you have to do. And maybe we'll advance, I think, this time.
And the tracking system that Martha's talking about can't just be how much money is going from here to there and being spent on childcare. We have to have R&D built into the system so that we study the best as we can. That includes my colleagues from universities, from the academy, to look at how the investments and the different approaches provinces are making regarding child outcomes, regarding their progress. And so we've not been very good at tracking where the money goes, and we've been abysmal when it comes to answering the so what question, no matter how much money is transferred.
I just want to pick up what Alanna was saying earlier about the central importance of people speaking out. Yeah. And I would suggest people tracking what's going on. Absolutely, governments have to track, but so do the people have to track. And one of my fears is that there isn't a lot of understanding about what makes for really good early learning in childcare. And there's not a lot of understanding about what is possible. We've had so little of it. We've had so little licensed, really high quality early learning in childcare in Canada that we don't necessarily know it when we see it. We don't actually know what it means to have affordable early learning in childcare. We don't know what the best way is to finance early learning in childcare, and so what happens is you get things like the government right now in Ontario introducing regulatory changes as solutions to problems that we know exist, but they're the wrong solutions. There is a real crisis in terms of recruitment and staffing and finding qualified early childhood educators for programs. But the solution is not to lower the qualifications or to change the ratio so we need fewer ECEs in programs, right? The answer to making early learning and childcare more affordable is not necessarily to make subsidies more available. It's actually for governments to fund the provision of early childcare sufficiently, for early learning and childcare sufficiently, so that the cost to parents is less. So we have a lot of work to do, I think, very quickly to educate and broaden the understanding of what makes for good policy and what makes for bad policy. Otherwise, we are going to see potentially bigger investments of public money, and they're going to go to the wrong thing, including the expansion, as Charles said, of for-profit childcare as opposed to, not-for-profit, publicly delivered early learning and childcare.
Yeah, actually, I want to go to Carolyn now, because one of the regulatory changes is to have a giant list of childcare spaces. Yeah. And what Carolyn called it was like a Kijiji of childcare. Go ahead, Carolyn.
Yeah, I was just going to pick up on what Morna was saying, but I'll also touch on the registry. I think what's so frustrating about what the Ford government is doing right now is that you're right, Morna, they're identifying the problems and then giving completely wrong-headed solutions when really good solutions are so readily at hand. Recruitment and retention, we had a early learning and childcare workforce strategy in this province, which should have been coming into play in April of this year, that promised a wage grid for early childhood educators to address decent pay and decent work for ECEs as a key way to address recruitment and retention. Instead of going ahead with that, they're instead trying to de-skill put more unqualified staff into programs, which is not going to address the problem in a good way. Affordability, they're claiming that even these regulation changes would somehow make childcare more affordable, but it comes at the cost of quality. I also don't think that it'll actually do anything to change the price of childcare for parents, which is the highest in the country right now. And then when it comes to accessibility, what are they proposing there? They're proposing a list, an online registry of unregulated childcare providers. So it's like the old supermarket bulletin board, but put it online. It's the Kijiji of childcare. It's the Ministry of Education acting as a glorified Kijiji. You need to find an unregulated childcare provider in your town. Well, the government's going to make that easier. Is that what we need? Is that going to ensure the safety, let alone quality education? Anything for young children and families, reliability for parents, none of that is addressed. And I think what's so troubling about what the Ford government is doing in childcare right now is that they're sort of lurching from crisis to crisis. And I really, what you were saying, Charles, the coalition tried to ring the alarm on that a year ago, that it's either rank incompetence or it's deliberately trying to sabotage a valued public service. Either way, it makes for really bad news for parents and for families and for early childhood educators. And we do have, just 10 days to go until these regulation proposals, the comment period closes. And we really need people to speak out on this because it's really going to have a negative impact for Ontario families.
Thanks, Carolyn. I want to take a moment to share some of the comments that have come in with folks. Sophia wrote, who's also in the childcare sector, has been doing some great work. She wrote, care, elder care, or childcare should not be a commodity. And I think quite a few of you actually touched on this. Monica again wrote, to borrow from what Martha said, the zombie ideas that just won't die keep coming back for some reason, opening the sector to unqualified operators to early learning. I've also heard from daycare operators and other advocates who are saying that one of the regulatory changes means that they're going to have the same amount of space, or it's unclear how much space, but they can have more kids. And, all of a sudden, I think the government will say, well, you know what, we have increased childcare because we've just allowed more kids to come in the same space. It's just mind-boggling how they are trying to provide access to childcare. I had Suhela, who also wrote, Suhela Emet, daycares that don't accept subsidies often refuse to admit children with special needs. This makes it even harder for families like mine to find care. What can we do to improve this situation? Would anyone like to take a moment to talk about this? Because we have a lot of parents who reach out to us about kids with special needs and what they're going through, because that's another level of difficulty. Forget finding access to childcare, but now you have
it's quite related to the fact that childcare is a private business, even if it's a nonprofit. And the idea that childcare is so privatized, it puts the operator in the business of making those kinds of decisions. Now, one province and one territory have said, with programs that they fund, they cannot refuse to take children with special needs. I mean, that's kind of much more connected to a human rights perspective. Like, why is it that you can turn away? Or I actually talk to people all the time where parents they call us up, like when they don't know who to call up. My child has been kicked out of childcare for behaving badly. And this happens all the time. It's boys, and it's often, kind of acting out behavior kinds of things. But what I don't understand is why that's allowed, because it's a real question. Why is it, we're in international treaties, there's an international treaty on disability. Why is it allowed? But nobody has really brought that up. Is that why is the province allowing childcare programs that they fund and that they license to turn children away? I had a parent call me up because her child was HIV positive. This was a long time ago, and was in Quebec, and they wanted to kick the child out, and she wanted to know if it was legal. This comes up all the time. So there's a lot of, the problem is that childcare is a private commodity, and it shouldn't be a private commodity. And it's a private commodity, even if it's nonprofit. It's less a private commodity, you know, it's quasi-public. But it's, the idea is that it's not a public responsibility. And I think that really has to be turned around. I think it's one of the main things that we need to do to really reconceptualize this whole thing, is to turn it around and accept it as a public responsibility. And that would, you know, it would fill in a lot of the holes. It would allow you to move forward in a lot of policy areas, of which this is a great example.
Yeah, I want to go to Alanna to talk a little bit about, because whenever we see government changing regulations, we all of a sudden it's more workload for ECEs, for these staff, and you know, people who are already burdened with the amount of work without getting the pay and the benefits that they deserve. Go ahead, Alanna.
Thanks, Dolly. You know, it's interesting because we've talked for years about the wages and working conditions of early childhood educators, and we've only seen this get worse in the last 7 or 8 months, especially as we have now all the additional health and safety requirements, important things, but ostensibly those responsibilities take away from the time that the early childhood educators are able to provide direct engagement, you know, building meaningful relationships with children, which is why they're there, right? When you talk to early childhood educators about why they became an ECE, they don't say so parents can go to work, right? They understand that's a function of early learning and childcare, but they do it because they value young children right in that moment, right? And what we're seeing is that, you know, we're continuing to increase the responsibility and the workload of educators, and we're not providing them the conditions they need to do the work in a meaningful way. And that will ultimately compromise the experiences that children are having. The proposed regulation changes only increase that again, right? More children in a room when educators have been calling for enhanced ratios, smaller group sizes, and they've experienced it recently, especially licensed childcare when it reopened at smaller groups. They saw the value when they had time to slow down with children and do that pedagogical work. To now see that under threat, see more work, and with other staff who aren't qualified, increases the burden and responsibility on them again. So I can't tell you how strongly the profession, early childhood educators are against or opposed to these changes. And I think it's really time we had a government that listened to the people who know this the best, which is them, right? It's ECEs.
So some of these changes, well, some of the regulations were put in place because of, you know, accidents that took place in centers, because of deaths. We've had situations where, you know, parents lost their babies. And I mean, I've spoken in the House about some of these examples when I proposed my bill in 2018. And then we still see governments coming forward with regulatory changes that actually endangers children. Charles, can I go back to you and ask a little bit about your experience, you know, working in government, and what are some of the things that you think are absolute must in terms of keeping, because we're facing a lot of the regulatory changes that takes away, like we talked about, the ratio, as well as lack of qualified staffing and supervision.
Well, I just want to underscore what Martha said earlier. And also, I guess I getting back to what Morna said, that we don't have any examples of what it looks like when everything is, you know, in the neighborhood of perfection in Canada. Well, we do. We just need to focus on catching people and organizations doing things right, understanding what's at play regarding the workforce and all the other things regarding parent involvement, parental leave. But Martha is absolutely right regarding the need for us to have a framework with teeth, an enforceable framework regarding what's in the best interest of the health and well-being of the youngest of our young, and for it to be enforced, for it to be inspected. And when we look at some of the things going on in home care and not-for-profits, the number of stories, I remember, Martha, I think it was about 5 or 6 years ago, those kids, those 3 and 4-year-olds that left the child care center and walked
Oh,
across the highway.
yeah,
You remember that one?
yeah.
From
They didn't
basically,
notice that they were gone.
they didn't notice they were gone. And the problem is, and this is about educating parents, the usual choice regarding childcare is geography and price point. And so for a long time regarding parent choice, we needed to escalate what parents look for, what they need to look for, the questions they need to ask. When I go into a child care center, I ask the staff, regardless of what the shape of it is and under what auspice, I ask the staff, how long have you been here? 2 months, 3 weeks, whatever. Or in the case of where my youngest went many, many years ago, they're still there in terms of the nature of how the governance there and how quality is assured. But Martha's absolutely right. We need a a health and well-being framework that's clear and enforceable, because words like public, private don't mean anything when you look up close. And that's what we need. These horror stories, unfortunately, will continue. And what the Ford government is doing, Dolly, I'm so glad that you're on the case. I'm so glad that people watching will continue to prosecute against what's going on. But this will hurt real kids. And, then the premier will find somebody else to blame, because they're very good at deflecting to others. And I'm also, when I was in government, when I was a deputy minister, we did some things regarding, pay equity and providing a boost to the childcare workforce. For a while, that was, part of something that took place. But governments have been on again, off again, and as I said earlier, the best thing we can do is put the pressure on some of those people in business, and those for whom phone calls will be returned, whether it's a liberal government or a conservative government or an NDP government or a Green government in place in Ottawa. Those are the people we should be talking to make sure they continue beyond the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. And actually, for viewers, one of the things we had to fight for, as Charles mentioned, this pay equity piece, which I think still needs to be addressed by the government, because they still haven't done a good job of addressing pay equity. And a lot of ECEs, mainly women, who are in this sector, and I'm sure all of you can talk about the fight that you've had to fight in the past. Last year, we had the AECEO and the OCBCC join us with, what was it, 20,000 petitions that we presented to the government just to save the wage enhancement grant. It's a little tiny, go ahead, Carolyn. Actually, I'll let you share your thought on this. Yeah.
Sure. No, the idea that we had to mount a campaign, get 15,000 signatures, presenting them into the legislature every day, just to save a $2 an hour wage enhancement grant that early child educators were receiving, just so that wasn't snatched away from them, is been that sort of set the tone for the fights that we've had to have, the struggles that we've had to have to maintain just what we have now. And I had hoped that one of the things in the pandemic was that it would make this government sort of wake up and see childcare in a new way. And it looked at first as if that was happening, right? Because we had, for the first time in this province, we had free childcare for essential service workers, back there in the spring. But, in June, we're just going to snap back to that same market system, the same, $1,000, $2,000 a month for parents, and, the same sort of disregard for the childcare workforce that we've ever had. And there's never been a realization on the part of the Ontario government that the pandemic is going to have a long-term impact on childcare. Mm-hmm. And if we do not maintain parents' confidence in the safety and quality of the childcare system, they are not going to rush back, right? Parents, we've seen mothers dropping out of the workforce because they don't feel confident in the government's plan for childcare. And so I really worry that if they don't turn around on these regulation changes right now, that problem is only going to get worse. We're going to see childcare centers, more of them closing. And then when the pandemic is over and we're ready to really restart the economy and really get into recovery, those childcare centers won't be there for us when we need them.
It's
and so
not
that's
just
the
snapping your
crisis
fingers.
right now. And we need the government to pay attention to it.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you, and I agree with Martha as well. It's not just snapping your fingers. There's a lot of work that needed to be done even before the pandemic, and what we saw during the pandemic was one of the sectors that needed to open up was childcare, and I remember having conversations with the minister right like within the first few days when we were like figuring out what to do with COVID-19, which was people need childcare, children need childcare. Healthcare, essential workers all around need childcare. And we saw a really nice example of what really worked in this sector as well. I have a few comments that I wanted to share because we were talking about accessibility, we were talking about kids with disability. So Jess Toma on Twitter actually shared with us, and she said, accessibility isn't addressed by government at all. And I think that's a big problem that we face in childcare. And I want to hear some of your thoughts on that. She also said children with disabilities have been essentially erased at every turn as well. Go ahead, Morna.
Yeah, so getting back to and echoing some of what Martha and others have said, one of the reasons that we don't have accessibility in Ontario and most parts of Canada is that we don't actually have a publicly managed system of early learning and childcare. So if there's childcare at all, it's because a few people have decided it's going to happen and they've just sort of figured out a way to make it happen. The government has not created any childcare, and it hasn't done a very good job of creating the conditions for the establishment of childcare. But if we want to improve access, we actually need public management, and we have to start treating childcare, early learning and childcare, as an essential public service at all times, not just for some workers during a pandemic, but for all children. We have to start understanding the value that it gives to all children, and start building a system as we have other public systems. That's the problem. The problem is, as we keep saying, it's regarded as an individual responsibility, a private responsibility, and it's left to the market to produce childcare. And what we've seen long before the pandemic, and what we especially saw through the pandemic, is absolute market failure. It doesn't work. It's not the way to get access. So that's what we really need for accessibility, is public management, and of course, proper public funding.
Yeah, absolutely. We're pretty much out of time, but I want to give you all just a minute or so to add your remarks. But before that, let me just share something that Monica had written actually, and Morna, this goes very well with what you just said, which is and actually said, let me see. But Martha, how can we get there when childcare is seen as a mechanism to keep that workforce working and not as a sector that is an important human service, where outcomes are only measured by stacking kids in a room? And I think this is the underlying thought that we had, throughout this conversation.
Well, if I can answer, let me just respond to that. First of all, we who work for it don't think of it that way. It is true that it is something to keep the workforce working, but it's also really important, even if the mother is not working or the parents are not working, for the child to get to go to an early childhood education program, because it's both things. I guess the best way I can say this is this person who was a good friend of mine who ran the OECD work on childcare, John Bennett, who was one of the best thinkers in childcare. I said to him one time, this is always debated in Canada. Is childcare for working mothers or is it for children? Which is it? And he said, I don't even understand why that's a problem. He said, it is true that mothers are working, or most mothers are in the labor force, and they need to have childcare so they can do that. And it should be arranged, so that they can. But it is the program is for children. So when you think about you think about it from Alanna's perspective, as I always think it was a quintessential early childhood educator, Alanna, that is really what you want to have happening while the mother is working. They're not mutually exclusive. And I think that we've dichotomized them. There's no reason to even think of them as dichotomized. So right now, what people are really concerned about is the economy. And it's really clear that childcare is one of the linchpins of getting the economy working. That's great. But that doesn't mean that it's, like sticking kids in a room, or you can undermine it by cutting the regulations. Both things, you look around the world, like there are very good early learning and childcare systems in other countries that achieve both of those goals, and others as well. And I think you have to keep them in, you have to keep two things in mind at the same time, essentially. You can't do one without the other. You shouldn't. So that would be my answer.
Thank you, Martha. We did get one more question specifically about the ratio changes. Carolyn, did you want to talk about that? I think Sarah wrote, what do you think about the CCYA changes to ratios?
I think they're reckless and ill-advised, to put it mildly. They're trying to change the staff to child ratios and group sizes. It would put younger children into larger groups with fewer qualified staff. So as Alanna described, for a 2-year-old, just 24 months old, instead of being in a toddler room with a 1-to-5 ratio, 1 staff for 5 children and a group size of 15, they could be in a preschool classroom with 24 children and 1 staff to 8 children at 24 months of age. So that's clearly watering down the regulations. And it's nothing that should be done at any time, but certainly not in the middle of a pandemic, when we know that staff are already stretched to the limit trying to do additional health and safety requirements, meet all the necessary protocols. It's a terrible idea.
It's bullying.
And so, yeah,
terrible.
It is, and it's very irresponsible. And I think there's a lot of proposals in the regulation posting that are problematic, but that's the one that sort of, I think everybody that I've talked to just thinks, how could they possibly think that was a good idea right now?
Thank you so much. Well, Sarah, here you have it. To all of you who have joined in, please remember to sign our petition, as well as contact your local MPP and obviously the minister to let them know that we do not want these regulatory changes. They are very dangerous. They will be harmful for our children, and parents, ECEs do not want them. Thank you to all of you. I want to give you 30 seconds each to make some concluding remarks. Charles, let's start with you.
Just on disabilities, the ability to adapt to the individual differences of children depends on the ratio. And you provide the right intimate ratio, and the number of issues that are called under the disability umbrella will be dealt with by high quality early childhood educators. I don't want to live in a society where the ratio of what full professors like me are paid at the University of Toronto compared to what early childhood educators is a disgrace. We need to ensure there's regression towards the mean. We can't get away with saying that early childhood education, early learning and care is the foundational building block for a lifelong of learning, health and well-being, and do what we do with the workforce and the quality of what we're supporting.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Alanna, you're next.
Thanks, Dolly. Sorry about if you hear background bedtime noises, but
It was great. It was the best cameo.
I think I just want to echo what I've said before, that, we all have a role to play in telling the government that these changes are unacceptable. We all have a role to play in telling them what we want our system to be like. And parents and early childhood educators know that this regulatory posting is taking us in the wrong direction at the wrong time, when we have a real opportunity to imagine what the system could be and how it could be otherwise. So I really encourage folks to get out there and share their perspective and make sure that people are hearing you, because your voice really matters in this.
Thank you, Alanna. Martha?
Yeah, I just want to support all of those things. And just to say that, we have turned these things back before, actually, and I mean, that's why it's really important. Like, that was just by having the community mobilize. And I think it's because there's not much in it. Like, they don't have a leg to stand on, really. And, like, there's, they can keep doing these things and stand up in the press conferences and saying, we think we're sort of supporting the vulnerable. But more and more people will know it's not true. So I think we're more powerful. If you look around, especially women, there's a lot of power. And I think that this is really time to speak up and, exercise it and just think, well, we can win this one. Because I think we can. That's my take.
I think we can too. Go ahead, Morna.
Yep, absolutely. We can win this. People are powerful, but they're most powerful when they're organized and when they're mobilized. And so what I want to say is, anybody who's concerned about access, who's concerned about quality, who's concerned about affordability, who's concerned about making sure that early learning and childcare programs are inclusive of special needs, children with special needs and others, then they should join the Ontario Coalition for Better Childcare. It's a fabulous organization, and get on their mailing list, because we can push back this regulatory changes, but that's not enough. We actually, at this moment, especially, have to move for major expansion of the highest quality early learning childcare systems that we deserve and that people need. Has to be affordable, and the way to do that is to organize and do it through organizations like the Coalition.
Absolutely.
You,
go ahead.
Thanks for the shout out. I was just going to say, as well as the petition that Doly has, if you go onto our website, which is childcareontario.org, you can join the Rising Up for Childcare campaign. We have a petition. We have a template for people to send in responses to the ministry. And later this week, we are not done pushing back on these changes. It's going to be at Toronto City Hall. The City of Toronto has put out a position against the regulation changes, and that's going to be going to committee. So we'll be having, that discussion there, and lots of people speaking out about it there. We're also putting out the results of a community survey. So look out for that before the end of the week. Together with the ACO. So thank you so much, everybody, and to everyone watching, speak up and make some noise, because I think we can change this.
Thanks for the opportunity, Doly.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all of you for joining me today. I am so honored to have you all join me. I think this is one of the best panels I've had. The discussion was absolutely incredible. And to all of you who joined us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, I really appreciate all of you and the work that you're doing in the childcare sector. This fight needs to continue. We have 10 days before the consultation by the government ends. Yes, we don't know what the result will be, and make sure you participate, but make sure to send a message to this government. It is all of you who can make a difference, and it's so important that we do this for the sake of our children, sake of this province. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening, all of you, and see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you. Take care.
Bye all.
Bye, Alanna. Bye, Martha. Bye, Charles.
Bye-bye.